We have a special guest, Mark Speed, today. He has a wife and a little girl, and a wonderful girl in Dallas area that may be watching on Facebook. If not, they'll get to see this broadcast later. But Kathy and Caitlin are there in Dallas. About 40 years ago, I was Mark's youth minister. And we had a fun time, didn't we, Mark? And we did a lot of foolish things. And we had more fun than you could believe in that youth ministry in West Texas, in Brownfield. But we, in a short period of time, I was there 5 years, and we grew a youth choir from zero, really. We didn't even have a youth choir. And to 125 in a very short period of time. We took 90 of them on tour with us to California and back. Those were great, great years, and great years of growth and learning and drawing near to God. Some wonderful people in that church and some incredible kids that went out from that place and are now in service and ministry all over the world, really. And so I'm very proud of all of those kids that came out of that ministry. It was just an incredible moment in time. Mark and I have stayed in touch through the years. In his single adult years, he landed with his business here in San Antonio. And for I think about 3 years, you were here in San Antonio and was a member of Trinity and a single adult ministry at Trinity. So we reconnected there. When I was in Dallas before that, we reconnected there. And then he moved to Houston area, met a wonderful young lady named Kathy, and they got married. And of course, they had 2 children, Braden and Caitlin. And wonderful life, a family, wonderful life. And you're going to hear more about this. As you know, the tragedy was a little over 2 months ago, just over 2 months ago, Braden decided he'd rather be in heaven than here for lots of reasons. And you're going to hear about that. And I think we're all going to be challenged as to how we look at people and love people and give hope to people. And as emissaries of Christ, how our kind touch makes all the world's difference. But nonetheless, what a joy it is to have Mark Speed. But before he comes up here, I want you to watch this video. This is from one of the network news channels in Dallas. Listen to what they say.
Week is full of new beginnings, promises made to ourselves and the people we love. Tonight, News 8's Jobin Paniker introduces us to a family moving forward, one day at a time.
This is a family that loves tradition here in Prosper.
I make Christmas candy. She makes Christmas cookies.
Holidays especially. But this year in the Speed home, someone is painfully missing.
I came home from the doctor and I walked up to tell him I was home, and there was a note on his door that said not to come in.
Mark and Kathy Speed are talking about their 18-year-old son, Braden. The Prosper High senior who loved Christmas and Hallmark movies took his life in October. In these times, it's the comforting words of their 12-year-old daughter that help.
We're still a family of 4. We're just a party of 3. And so we always have to have his stocking up.
That will not change. What has changed is a parent's resolve.
I think it's becoming a lost art, just deep relationship. And Braden was a very much deep relationship kid.
A father who now blogs the answers to those big questions. How and what's next? The answer came to him in Braden's voice.
I needed people to invite me into their lives, to care about me, to make me feel valued, and to stay.
The Speeds took the answer to the school he attended, hoping to change the culture in schools across America, starting here in Prosper.
I'm so tired of hearing, we have to stop bullying, we have to be nicer after every child.
The family and the school are looking into special programs of empowerment, of peer-to-peer relationship building. The school tells us it's eager.
The Holy Spirit has walked with us, and that's the sole purpose of our message.
It is the message of this season, too. Braden's stocking will stay up every year. His pictures will always be ornaments. That just may be the toughest tradition. Jobin Paniker, Channel 8 News.
If you or someone you know is having suicidal thoughts, call that toll-free number on your screen to seek help. There is always help.
My dear friends, welcome my friend Mark Speed. Come up here. As you can imagine, you need to pray for him. He lost his son just 2 months ago. The bright point in his life, with his children, of course, anybody's children. And I've told him last night, as he's been here since Friday, and we've talked and talked and talked and cried and prayed and all these things, that he will be speaking to people who have lost children in many different ways. He will be speaking to parents and grandparents and teenagers. And in this world that is increasingly connected to the internet and social media, and yet becoming more isolated than ever, we need to hear this story today, because it's a part of our Christian pilgrimage and how to circumvent, how to walk responsibly in this world. Mark told me last night, I believe you told me, that Braden had 500,000 Snapchat friends on the internet and not one friend in Dallas. Boy, that's isolationism. You think you're a part of this humongous community, but you're sitting in your room alone. And loneliness is a part of all this. So Mark, before we get into questions and answers, I want you to say anything you want to our people. What is the message you want them to hear?
I want you guys to know that this is a very tough thing to do, but it's the perfect place for me to be at this time in my life, because as you heard, Ron has been my mentor and friend for 40 years, and I don't do this. But it was very clear to me the night this happened that Braden wanted me to express some things to people who walked his path. And all paths are different. His was one that was of loneliness. But he needed people to invite him and include him in this world, to make him feel loved and valued, and to stay with him even though it might be a little uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable right now, but I want to walk through my uncomfort, and I want to come to your lives and perhaps people in this room who might need to hear some things that aren't being talked about. And I couldn't pick a better place than to be with my brother Ron to do this. And a congregation of family that he trusts and that you trust him. You've got a very special shepherd here, and I want to express that.
Mark, as y'all know, when we talked about this, the reason I asked him to come and talk with me on this stage is because I know that everybody deals with social media. They deal with lonely kids. They deal with people who feel like they're misfits. They have grandchildren that they're raising. There are people who don't know what to do and don't know how to reach out and love in the way that kids need love. And that's what we want to kind of explore today. And I know you're going to have a lot of questions in your own mind. I'm going to tell you how to be a part of his blog. But one of the reasons I asked him is because immediately following, we talked that day for a long time, and then days to follow. And it was clear to me that Mark wanted to try to make sense of this, as anybody would, but he wanted to do it by trying to make things better for the people around him. He immediately went to schools, to principals, to churches. He talked on the next Sunday in his church that he was in. He got up and talked to the young people and challenged them in getting to know kids. But so I know this is hard for you, Mark. I know you're a grieving dad more than anything else. And there are a lot of people out here that are with you. They understand that spot that you're in, and that you and Kathy are in, and even Caitlin are in. But before we get into what you're doing now, etc., because he's doing a lot of things now that I think are going to have important impact in years to come. The blog is one thing to help make sense of all of this and the thoughts and all the things that are going on. I want to go back to before the event happened on October 30th, that I know for many years that Braden struggled with being accepted. Many of you know in Alamo Heights High School, a freshman about 2 years ago decided to take his own life because he was bullied on the internet. I'm telling you, you get in that lonely space in your room and you think the whole world, if as a teenager often thinks that the most important thing in the world is this right here. And it's just not. But at that age and that time, it is. And so those sour words become so off-putting that loneliness ensues. Now, Braden had ADHD, right? Mm-hmm. And y'all were dealing with that for a long time. But he didn't have any other disability.
No.
There was nothing there that made him mentally incapacitated at all. So I want you to tell this wonderful group of people here what you and Kathy did in recognizing the issue, and what did you and Kathy do in trying to resolve and help him become accepted?
Well, the first thing is I want to say that I just realized that people tell me I have a radio voice, but I just realized I have a radio face on that big billboard there. But Braden was a beautiful boy, a beautiful baby, perfect, had all his fingers and toes, and he was an athletic kid, had perfect eye-hand coordination. He could bat like anybody, he could pitch like anybody, could catch it better than most. He just couldn't put the pieces together. So when they put him in town, he would be lost as to who to throw the ball to. The coaches said he'd be a great ball player, but he needs to be in the outfield. And I just thought of that this morning. It's a little analogous of what happened to Braden. He got put in left field, or right field. That's the place the ball doesn't go. There's not a lot of activity over there. And so from about, I'll start probably from when he went into grade school. We began seeing his inattentiveness play out in social interactions. He couldn't focus, he couldn't sit at the table, and he didn't fit into the perfect box. And so the teachers began saying he needs to be tested. And I hate that phrase, but it's very, very common. Probably, I have no stats on this, but it's probably 60-75% of the kids are tested for something now. And then if they don't fit in, they begin medicating. Now, the classroom in public schools is a terrible laboratory to try to test drugs on children who are trying to form friendships and don't know how. They're all trying to find their way, but a medication might have a side effect or some sort of an effect that creates a difference. And so kids begin seeing differences. They're not that huge, but they're harder. So we'll not consciously do it, but we'll subconsciously place those here, and we'll go to those who fit the box. And so that kept happening in different settings. And Daddy was relocating several times, and so every time we would try to reestablish in this early phase of his life, it would move, it would change. That makes it more difficult. And before we know it, he didn't learn the social skills that he needed to navigate the nuances of relationship building. And so he became lonely, left out, not invited, and lonely. And so, of course, moms and dads do what we do. We talk to parents and say, can't you include my kid in? And that's parents trying to force a relationship versus he knowing how to do it, or better yet, kids coming into his life and saying, hey, Braden, why don't you come to my place and let's hang out together, ride a bike, shoot some hoops. And so it didn't happen. And time became more time, and before you know it, we're in middle school, and now we move again. And now he met a couple of boys. This was the type of boy my son was, is he met two boys in first grade. One was Dylan and one was Matthew. And both were in Katy, Texas, outside of Houston. And he had a deep friendship with these two boys, and they with him. And they had a heart for him, and he for them. One was a little big for his size at the time, or his age, and the other one was a little quiet. But they connected. And those boys are still missing him today. Mom and Dad tried to find friends. They tried to talk to teachers, tried to get the schools involved, the churches involved, the Sunday schools to understand that we needed that. But parents tend to put their kids where they're better suited with the ones that are easier. This is not an indictment on parents. We're all the same. But it happened. And so he goes to high school. It becomes a perpetuating wheel. He gets into band. There are miscues and social interactions, but they're not big. They're just small enough to be different. So he was left alone. Now, social media comes in about the time he's really getting into the high school years, where Snapchat and Twitter and Facebook, which is for old people, I know that. But those are all there, and so you see lives that are going on and perfect pictures of kids doing high fives and wearing mums and connecting and being invited, and he's not getting invited. And he's at that stage where he really can't discern fake from real, false from true, and he buys the false, and he thinks he's not here for anybody's purpose. He has no purpose. So that was basically the first 12, 18 years of his life, forming up to his late
When
days.
did you know that he was really in trouble?
The last 2 years. We've always suspected he was going to find trouble. It was when it would happen, and God, would you please bring someone into his life to make his life feel valued? So 2 years ago, approximately, it was when he hit.
So you knew that he was slipping away.
Yeah, you're in junior year now. You're nearing the end of your primary school years. You're about to break out into adulthood and go on your own. And he sees, well, why? I'm not ready. There's no one. Why would I even go beyond high school? This has been
I'm sure you and Kathy both worked hard at trying to figure this out and what to do. Y'all spend a lot of time talking to each other about
every day.
Every day.
Every day. And every night. If you're a parent out there, or a grandparent, you know this, that your kids are the most important thing in your earthly world, and that they are your precious prize and treasure.
When I want to skip forward just a little bit to the event happened on the 30th of October, that he decided to go to heaven, and he had talked about that, wanting to be in heaven. And so you knew the danger was there. It was hard to leave him alone, I'm sure. And I'm sure you and Kathy both were always on guard for that. Before that happened, though, you changed your job status. Tell me about that and why you did it.
Well, folks, this was a God thing, because I've been a successful team manager at State Farm Claims for over 25 years. At the peak of my career, widely known as a person who does it right. But it was taking far too much of my life away from what was most important, and that was my family and my children, specifically that one. And so out of all the things that I had worked all my life to do was to promote and have status and importance and authority, I decided that it was needed to change. And so I asked to be demoted into a job that is less time consuming and more structured, where I arrive on time and I leave on time and I don't take my work home. My vacations and my weekends and my holidays are not consumed by my work. And so my focus was to be a better dad and friend to my son and spend some time with him. That was almost 30 days to the day before this happened.
So you just wanted to spend more time with him and zero in on him to hopefully prevent this from happening. Any parent would do that, to do whatever it takes to help their child, and that's what you did and what Kathy did, I know. Now, we move past or to the day afterwards. I don't know how much you want to talk about, and I don't want you to, the event itself, but Kathy's the one that first discovered that this tragedy had happened, and she called you, right?
Correct.
And then y'all took Caitlin to a park and intercepted her from school and diverted her away from the home in order to deal with her,
Right.
Because she's now your precious commodity.
That's right.
And what a charming child she is. She texted him so many times this weekend. It was really beautiful. I'm very proud of her for that connection
She's a
to her daddy
a special
and
girl.
to her mother. Yeah, special girl. When did you realize that you wanted to move into a purpose, try to find purpose out of this? Out of that, tell me about what happened, especially with a minister that encountered you. I want them to hear about the ministry from a church, because I want you to hear it from your ears how important you are when somebody else's tragedy happens. Tell them what happened from people some you knew, some you didn't know.
Good. That is one of the most important pieces that I gathered through this. The part that happened before was important to know, but the part that occurred unknowingly, never expectedly after, is probably the most important piece of this story. The day I was called from Kathy, she was hysterical, of course, and I knew likely what had happened. I couldn't understand because she wasn't speaking English. And I jumped in my car, and I had about a 40-minute drive to get home, knowing at the end of that trip what I was going to find, but never realizing what I would find would be a minister who was kneeling at my wife's lap, praying over her in the absence of her husband, a total stranger. He was a minister there in Prosper, and I didn't know.
But he wasn't the church y'all went to.
He wasn't the church I went to. He was the minister of the First Baptist Church, which is a small church, ironically, in a large and growing place, but he was a very perfect man for the job because he was a chaplain on duty for rotation with the Prosper Police that day, and he was called into this call. He was there when I arrived. He was praying over her. He led me through and Kathy through this dark moment that no one could fathom, and he counseled me on how to present this to Braden's sister of 11 years old within 15 minutes. I had to deliver this because in social media, she could have found out on a group text. So he said, let's go to a place that's neutral. We'll go there. Here's what you say. Here's what you don't say. And he walked through this. I presented the news after this devastating moment. He then said, you're invited, if you don't have a church, or even if you do, you're invited to our church. And I can still see it in my mind's eye. There's a white steeple in the small church within the view of that park where he said, you can come there and have the memorial service for your son. And so I thought, well, that's probably a perfect venue for a small crowd. And we ultimately selected that location, although and I'm a member of a large church, a mega church, not to diminish what that church does because it's been a tremendous church. He just happened to be the man there at the time and the church venue for the situation. So we worked and put together a funeral service. We did it there at that church, and it was kind of perfect. It had a very good message. And here's a message too that's important to your congregation: is this church had never met me nor any of my family. I had probably 60 people come in from across the state and across the country to be here. This church enraptured us in their arms. They served us. They served us not cold sandwiches, but warm soul food. And it was soul food because this church was Christ for us. And they served us. They never asked for anything in return, not one thing. Now, at the end of the service on a Saturday, the minister, we had a home full of family and friends who came into our home, and probably 100 people ultimately trickled out, and it's now late in the evening. And I get a phone call. We're winding down. I get a phone call, and it's from this minister, and he says, hey, Mark, could I come over? And I said, sure. We got a lot of food. Most people are leaving. So he walks in, and there's just 2 people left, myself and one of the other neighbors, and he says, I'd like to just be here. And I said, do you have anything you want to talk to us about? And he said, no, I just want to be here. Now, I just relaxed. I just totally relaxed. We talk and we joke and we're smiling, and I've kind of let him down. And my last guest leaves the house, and the minister hugged my wife, and she went to bed, and he and I walked to the door. I'll never forget this. He walked to the front of my door. I opened the door, and he says, is there anything else I can do for you? And I said, you've done everything you can. I can't imagine asking for anything more. And he closed the door. I locked the door and went back to my family, now of 3 instead of 4. And I sat down and was overwhelmed. Why am I still standing? This happened 4 days ago. And it came upon me that it was clear the reason I was standing was because of a man who walked out of nowhere into an uncomfortable place. He got into our lives and he invited us in and he stayed. And I talked to my family and I said, I just realized that we just had a man who was in Christ's skin, a Christ in man's skin, walking into our door and bringing a church of Christians who changed our lives and made it livable. I got to get that message out. I have to get that message out. And I have to get the message out to people who need to find the Bradens, who are lonely, good people, wonderful hearts that aren't just being separated because they're a little bit different, very slightly different. But I got busy because I just knew there were messages that I had hoped to this day I wish had been brought to the forefront earlier and families had been transparent.
We need to talk about this. We need to talk about these issues.
We need to talk about it.
You said there were 3 things. The last one was stay. What are the other 2?
You need to find people who need people.
Okay, see people or find people who need people.
Come into their lives.
Come into their lives and make a way in.
Invite them into your life.
Okay.
And the big one, this is the hard one, stay.
Stay, if you possibly can.
That's hard to do.
Stay and help them. You find a need and meet it. You see a hurt and heal it. That's what we've talked about for 15 years here. Last night we were at one of the great restaurants here in town, and we walked in and a family of probably 7 or 8 came in, and immediately the teenager boy of the group went over, his head bowed. He never looked up the entire meal. He got his phone. He dealt with his phone the entire time. No one interacted with him, and he didn't interact with anybody else. And immediately, Mark turned to me and said, there's a Braden right over there. There's a Braden right there. You see somebody who needs you. And it might just be, it may be in a place where you can't stay with them, but it might be a place where you can go say a kind word or a loving word. One thing I love about our youth group, I was telling you last night, is I've seen them find guests, teenagers that come ask them to sit with them. You don't know what that means. It can be life-changing. That little act, sit with me. Just sit with me. You see somebody sitting by themselves, move over here. Let's get to know you. That's what you're talking about, right?
It is. That's
and I'm telling you, there are more Bradens than just teenagers, by the way.
Yeah.
They're children, they're adults. And but today we're talking about Braden the teenager.
Yeah.
And staying for not only for, check in with them, make them your friend if that's at all possible. And there are many of you who've had friends for many, many years, like Mark and I have been for over 40 years. And those are wonderful friends to have, because as we were talking when he flew in from New Orleans Friday night.
And I did that to save some money. It's $5.
He saved $5. So we went out to dinner. In fact, Jeanette and I were in New Orleans for the ball game on Tuesday. I told him, I said, you're the only person I know who's been to New Orleans since I have. But he came in Friday night, and of course we've talked all weekend, we've cried, we've done everything else all weekend. We've been touched by the power of God. But we have really honed in on this thing about loving people where they are, not where you think they ought to be. Love people where they are, not where you think they ought to be. One thing that I gleaned from what you told me about you and Kathy, Braden always, and kids, this is true, y'all are his parents, and he knew you're supposed to love him, which he knew that they did. And they talked to him, and they cared for him, and they prodded him, and they tried to get him to do all the right things. But here's the thing, teenagers need more than parents. They need peers. And I'm afraid too often we so discriminate. No one discriminates more than teenagers. They're an odd kid. They're too quiet. They're too much of a sissy. Or they're too much of a jock. Or they're the bad boys. or whatever it is. We discriminate, but sometimes when we bring people into our vortex as followers of Jesus Christ, we have a responsibility. Grace is not to keep, it's to give away. Forgiveness is not to keep, it's to give away. Love is not to keep, it's to give away. And that's what you're talking about.
Absolutely. And now this man that I described, this minister, is just one example. You know, Jesus talked about parables. He talked about one prodigal son. He didn't talk about a bunch of them. So that's why I share this one example. But I want to emphasize that the community at reached at large has totally been moved by this and by the message that's being shared. And our Speed family has changed as well because of what those people have done by giving their love and their staying. They're not ones who just come in and go. We have been stayed with from the moment this very moment this happened, and it's been a total blessing. And I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for that power of the Holy Spirit that's been just infused into this community and into our home.
When we were talking right after this happened, he and I talked about, I said, you need to write this down. I said, you need to write an op-ed. You need to eventually write a book. You need to do something. It's cathartic to do that. And he chose a blog, which I think is brilliant. And by the way, if you want to get on that blog, just go to Google. If you don't know what to Google is, see Eric back there. But go to Google or one of the search engines and just put in Braden or Braden's Voice.
Braden's Voice.
Braden's Voice. And it'll come up. And you can sign up. I get them every time that they
follow.
Kathy wrote the last blog and it was wonderful. And you most often write them, but they're really excellent thoughts. Someday they'll become a book, more than likely, that Kathy and Mark will put together. But it's beginning to find that purpose. And it's kind of like, what would Braden have us do? And I'm telling you, I can answer that even. He wants people to be real. And he wants people to love him where he is.
That's right.
He wants people to care for him and to invite him into their circle. This is rhetorical. If you don't know what rhetorical means, it means don't answer overtly. It means this is private. But in every one of our lives, at some point in our life, we have all felt like a misfit or an outcast. 99% of us have felt that way, one way or the other. It can be in grade school, middle school, high school, whatever. You feel like people judge you. Well, they do. But how much do we care? And are there enough people to counterpoint those judging people with caring people? This is not the call of Christ. This is the call of Christ. The scriptures that come alive are the ones that are powered by your voice and your feet and your ears. That's scripture alive. It's the grace of God alive. If there had just been one kid in church or one kid in high school that said, Braden, eat with us. Braden, sit with me. Braden, come to Sunday school class with me. Braden, come to this swim party with me. It could have meant the world.
Can I take one
Yes.
quick thing? A couple of things. My motive here is to give practical answer to the question that the night I sat on a stoop underneath his window all night long crying, I came to the conclusion that parents would be asking the question or feeling like they wanted to ask the question, what could we have done? What can we do? And I needed a better answer than saying, we need to do better. We need to be nicer. We need to not bully. So that's the reason for my message. We need to dig deeper. And then I'm left with the question, okay, so what do I do? Questions as a parent I would have liked to have had answered. What in practical sense can I do each day? What can I train my kid up to do? What can I do myself in a practical way, observable way? So that's a large part of the reason for the blog, is for us to identify specific things as parents who've experienced this, to provide to parents and grandparents and teens and kids and everyone who needs it, which is everyone. What can I do? So we look at things as a parent. You can actively ask your kid, did you find a kid today? Did you find a kid? And what did you do? How did you think it made them feel?
You've done that in your own family.
I did it in my family with Caitlin. I call it the Caitlin's game. She finds a Braden every day. And I ask her in the morning, we make it fun. We talk about what can we do. Find them. That afternoon I'll say, did you find them? And what did you do? And how did they feel? And how do you feel? And you'll be amazed at what happens. Parents, that's what you can do. Grandparents, you can love your grandkids unconditionally. Love them without exception. Accept them.
That's what, when I say every Sunday at the end of worship, go out and be the church, that's what it means.
That's it, absolutely.
All right, Mark, we have a few minutes left. We have teenagers over on this side. What would you say to them?
If you don't fit this description, if you're inside the box, look outside your box, okay? You'll be amazed at what treasures you'll find outside that box. If you had found my son, you would have been amazed after the slight effort it took to come through that uncomfortable place and come in and invite that person that's outside that box. And it'll not only change that kid, I'll promise you, it'll change you. And it'll make you. And you can grow from that. And you will be the Christ that I believe you want to be, that you need to be. You need to have your sole identity in Jesus Christ alone. I'll leave you with that. You don't want to make it outside what Jesus thinks of you. Everyone else, Ron, as good a friend, a lifelong friend as he's been, he's temporary. He won't be here forever. Christ is. So make sure you seek your identity in Christ.
And that lasts forever. It's not just teenage years. Your touch, caring for somebody else that's not cared for, changes their world.
That's right.
And therefore you are the touch of Christ.
That's right.
That's what the gospel means. You've already spoken to parents and grandparents. We have several grandparents that are raising their grandchildren. We have children, we have teenagers here whose parents don't even live here in town or even in this country. Mm-hmm. We have people who have all different kinds of blended families and are by themselves. And I want you to know, in a world that has difficulty and complexity brought on by the information age, a lot of it is, but at the same time creates this incredible vacuum and loneliness and heartache. We need to be wary of that and know how to use it. Social media is one of the greatest things that ever happened. Everybody in this room has a phone. Mm-hmm. Some of you have a flip phone, but you got a phone. They belong in museums.
I looked at this other room.
I saw somebody with a flip phone the other day and I went, what is that? But we're all connected. We need to know how to use it, how to respect it, and not let it dominate your life and your relationships. And when they dominate your relationships, when you sit down and you spend your whole day in front of a screen or a phone, you're being hindered.
That's right.
And your growth spiritually and emotionally is thwarted. And you're going to pay for that someday. As fun as it may be, you're going to pay for it because you didn't build relationship.
Right.
This was a charming, wonderful, athletic, sweet boy who begged for friends. And nobody afforded him that. They were too busy with their phones. And many of them defriended him and shunned him. If this world ever knows how to use the good things that are great, like social media or phones, and we really use them, if we don't, they become harmful and they become devilish to me.
Right.
We really do need to learn. Do you know that since social media, I've told you this, since social media 20 years ago came on the scene, teenage suicide is up 70%. Figure that. It doesn't bring about community.
No.
It brings about isolation. It can bring about community, but it most often brings isolation. It doesn't mean the phones are bad. They're not. They're great. And kids should have them. I'm an advocate for that, because safety and all that with the parents. But boy, when we abuse anything, you don't kill printing presses because there's pornography. You learn how to use the printing press, and that you don't throw your television out the window because they're bad programming. You learn to use what's good for you and in the moderation that you should do it. It's like everything else in life.
Yeah.
We learn to do that. Now, any other message to our people that you want to say? By the way, I told you about the blog. Go to Google, Braden's Voice. If you don't, you can email me and I'll send it to you.
Yeah, bradensvoice.blog. I may not say another word, or I may say a lot of words. I might write a book, or I may never write a book. But what I wanted to get out quickly, and Ron, thank you so much for bringing me to your congregation. Hopefully somebody heard a word or two that can help you. I want to say thank you again for having me here, making me feel welcome and as comfortable as I could possibly be. Having not been a person who does this, but I just ask you guys to remember that the whole purpose of this talk and our walk in this world is to live solely and purposefully in Jesus Christ. So every day I ask him to get me out of the way, and I ask you to consider doing the same thing. We do tend to get in our own way, and to just use our vessel here, this weak and flawed body, to the purpose of his purpose here in this temporary world. I believe my son is in glory, and I'll get to meet him there. I do.
He knew the Lord.
That.
He
Absolutely.
loved the Lord.
He did. And so I know he'll be there, and I appreciate you listening and being here with me for this time. And any prayers, I pray that anybody who hears my voice and wants to talk about this more personally, you are welcome to call me anytime. You can reach me through that blog. It's got an email, and I'm wide open to that. So thank you.
One more thing I want to say about the blog and what Mark is trying to do. He's trying to figure out what he's going to do with this. He's been off of the work at his company. He's about to go back in a few days.
Yeah.
And his family will find some routine again. But he's trying to figure out what to do with this ministry, because he and Kathy both have this ministry of trying to make purpose out of all of this. There are people that are giving to this campaign. He has already distributed money to schools and to churches and youth groups for counseling needs and for kids that need help and need counseling. If you want to contribute to that, you can do that through his organization. You can give it to the church, and we'll make sure he gets it if you want to do that. Or if you want to give it even to our own youth group for youth that may need counseling or help, we will do that as well.
Right.
And that'll be the same kind of purpose.
Absolutely.
But I just wanted you to get to know Mark and his story, because it's really an incredible story that anybody, and some of you have already gone through. I know, I'm looking at you, and you've felt this heartache of some kind or another. But I wanted you to know it, and I wanted you to hear his voice, and I wanted you to hear the gospel message that really does ring true of the scripture coming alive. And so I want you to thank Mark for me. Mark? You can go, you can be seated. Be seated. I'm going to be here after worship if anybody wants to join the church or accept Christ. Loretta, here, this is how we're going to end today. Come back up here. I want her to sing that song again, because it was she didn't know that Mark was going to be here. She put this together under God's unction, and sometimes God does wonderful things in blending services. So I want you to hear these words again. Loretta, welcome, Loretta.
I believe for every drop of rain that falls, a flower grows. I believe that somewhere in the darkest night, a candle glows. I believe for everyone who's gone astray, someone will come to show the way. I believe, I believe above the storm, the smallest prayer will still be heard. And I believe that somewhere in the great somewhere, He hears every word. Yes, every time I hear a newborn baby cry, or touch a leaf, or see the sky, then I know I believe. When you walk through a storm, hold your head up high, and don't be afraid of the dark. At the end of the storm is a golden sky and the sweet silver song of a lark. Walk on through the wind, walk on through the rain, though your dreams be tossed and blown. Walk on with hope in your heart, for you'll never alone. No, you'll never walk alone. I believe, I believe, I believe, I believe.
Amen, amen. Let's stand together. Before we dismiss, thank you, Loretta. Mark, go ahead. He has some Braden buttons to give to our teenagers over here. Remember to pray, continue to pray for Mark and Kathy and Caitlin in the days to come. They have a long road ahead of them, and pray that they'll find all the things they need to do with this. But as we go out from this place, you are the church. You're the people of God. You are the message of love. You're the emissaries of His grace. So go in peace and change your world.